It's 5:32 in the morning, November 20th, 1942, North Africa. Sergeant Tommy Drake is crouched behind his Willys MB Jeep, pouring something into the fuel tank that would make any Army engineer lose their mind. Gasoline, check. Ethanol siphoned from a captured Italian supply depot, check. And then the secret ingredient, something he keeps in an unmarked jerry can, something he won't tell a soul about, not even the men whose lives depend on his Jeep running faster than anything else in this God-forsaken desert. The mixture violates 14 separate Army regulations. Drake knows because Captain Hendricks read them out loud last week, all 14, before threatening him with a court-martial. But here's the thing. When Rommel's Panzers are bearing down on your position at 25 miles per hour, and your Jeep is supposed to be the eyes and ears that keep 200 men from getting slaughtered, regulations start feeling like suggestions. Real, flexible suggestions. Drake's hand shakes just a little as he caps the fuel tank. Not from fear, from the math he's running in his head. The mixture has to be precise. Too much ethanol and the engine seizes in this heat. Too little and you don't get the speed. And that secret ingredient, well, that's the magic. That's what turns a standard reconnaissance Jeep that tops out at 65 miles per hour into something that can hit 85 on flat ground. In the desert, 20 extra miles per hour is the difference between getting intelligence back to command and becoming a burnt-out wreck with 3 dead soldiers inside. He's tested it exactly 11 times, lost 1 Jeep in the process. Engine literally melted, but the other 10 runs worked. Each time, his Jeep pulled away from pursuing German vehicles like they were standing still. Each time, his crew got back alive with the information that saved American positions, and each time, Captain Hendricks threatened to have him arrested. The Army doesn't appreciate innovation, especially when it comes from a 24-year-old sergeant from Kentucky who learned chemistry from making whiskey in the backwoods with his grandfather. But we'll get to that. First, you need to understand what Tommy Drake was up against in November 1942. North Africa wasn't like the war you see in the movies, all dramatic tank battles and clear front lines. It was chaos, a 1,000-mile meat grinder where German and Italian forces under Rommel were fighting British, American, and Commonwealth troops for control of supply lines, ports, and ultimately the route to Middle Eastern oil fields. The terrain was brutal. Open desert that could cook you at 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, freeze you at night, and hide enemy positions until you were right on top of them. Rommel, the desert fox, had turned reconnaissance into an art form. His armored cars and light tanks probed Allied positions constantly, looking for weak spots, tracking movements, calling in devastating artillery strikes before anyone knew what hit them. The Allies needed the same capability, but there was a problem. American Jeeps, the famous Willys MB that became an icon of World War II, were reliable, versatile, and tough as nails. But they weren't fast enough. Not for the kind of deep reconnaissance missions that could make the difference between victory and annihilation. Standard-issue Jeeps topped out around 65 miles per hour on good roads. In the desert, with sand and heat, you were lucky to hit 55. German armored cars, the SDKFZ 222s and 231s, could reach 50 to 55 miles per hour cross-country. Half-tracks could do 45. If you ran into them during a reconnaissance run, you had maybe a 10-second head start before they closed the gap. 10 seconds to decide, fight or run. Fighting meant you were outnumbered and outgunned. Running meant hoping your Jeep could maintain speed long enough to get out of range. Most of the time, it couldn't. Between September and November 1942, the 1st Armored Division lost 23 reconnaissance Jeeps to enemy contact. That's 69 men, dead, captured, or missing. Each loss meant blind spots in Allied intelligence. Each blind spot meant soldiers walked into ambushes they never saw coming. Tommy Drake watched it happen. He was part of the 1st Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, a unit tasked with the impossible. Go deep into enemy territory, find German positions, get back alive, repeat daily. He'd been in North Africa for 6 weeks and attended 11 funerals. Men he'd trained with, eaten with, men who'd talked about home and girls and what they'd do after the war. All dead because their jeeps couldn't outrun German armor. The official response from command was predictable. Maintain operational protocols, improve evasive tactics, request air support when available, none of which addressed the core problem. The jeeps were too slow. Private Eddie Kowalski died on October 14th. His jeep got cut off by a German half-track during a probe near Sidi Bou Zid. The half-track's machine gun tore through the jeep's thin frame like paper. Eddie was from Cleveland, worked in his father's bakery before the war. 22 years old. His driver, Corporal James Liu from San Francisco, took a round through the throat. Died before the medic could reach him. The gunner, Private Samuel Henderson from Atlanta, was captured. The Germans sent him to a POW camp in Italy. He'd survive the war, but he'd lose 60 pounds and never talk about what happened in that camp. Sergeant Mike O'Brien died on October 29th. Another reconnaissance run, another German armored car that was just a little bit faster. Mike was Irish-American from Boston, loud, funny, couldn't keep a secret if his life depended on it. His Jeep tried to outrun an SDKF Z-222. Almost made it. The Germans' 20mm autocannon found them at 400 yards. Mike's Jeep flipped, burned. No survivors. His wife got the telegram on November 7th. She was pregnant with their first child. Lieutenant Marcus Webb died on November 11th. Veterans Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Webb was an experienced officer, 28 years old, West Point graduate, by the book. He followed doctrine perfectly, approached a suspected German position, observed from 800 yards, began withdrawal when spotted. His Jeep should have made it, standard evasion protocol, but a Panzer III was waiting on the flank. One shot, direct hit. Webb and his crew were obliterated. By mid-November, morale in the reconnaissance battalion was in the toilet. Nobody wanted the assignment. It was a death sentence. You went out, you found the enemy, and you died because you couldn't get away fast enough. Simple as that. Tommy Drake had a different opinion. You didn't die because reconnaissance was impossible. You died because you were using equipment that wasn't optimized for the mission. And if the Army wasn't going to fix that, well, he'd fix it himself. Now, here's where Tommy's background becomes relevant. See, most soldiers in 1942 came from cities or farms, places where you learned a trade or worked land that had been in the family for generations. Drake came from the Kentucky hills, a place where making your own whiskey wasn't just tradition, it was survival. His grandfather, Mason Drake, ran a still in the woods outside Harlan County, taught Tommy the chemistry of fermentation when he was 12. How to control temperature, measure alcohol content, adjust recipes to get the result you wanted. The lessons started simple. Mason would take young Tommy into the woods before dawn, when the mist still clung to the hollows and you could hear the creek running cold over limestone rocks. The still was hidden in a cave, natural rock formation that kept the temperature steady and the smoke from being spotted. Mason taught him that whiskey making wasn't just about throwing corn mash in a pot and hoping for the best. It was science, pure science that you could taste. Temperature control was everything. Too hot, and you'd burn off the good alcohols, leaving you with something that tasted like paint thinner and could blind you if you weren't careful. Too cold and fermentation would stall, leaving you with sour mash that was good for nothing but pig feed. You had to maintain between 78 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit during fermentation. In the summer, that meant cooling. In the winter, it meant heating. Either way, it meant paying attention every single day. Mason showed him how to test alcohol content without fancy equipment. You'd pour a bit in a spoon, light it, watch how it burned. Blue flame meant good, high proof. Yellow or orange meant water or impurities. You could tell the proof within a few percentage points just by watching the flame dance. That skill, reading chemical reactions by observation, that would save Drake's life in North Africa more than once. Then there was the art of the cut. When you distill alcohol, it comes out in 3 parts: the heads, the hearts, and the tails. The heads come first, high in methanol and other volatiles that can poison you. You throw those out? Always. The hearts come next, pure ethanol and the flavor compounds that make good whiskey. That's what you keep. The tails come last, lower proof, oily, harsh. You throw those out too, or save them for the next batch. Knowing when to make the cuts, that was the difference between master distillers and amateurs. Mason taught Tommy to trust his nose. The heads smelled sharp, almost like acetone. The hearts smelled clean, sweet, like corn and wood smoke. The tails smelled heavy, musty, wrong. You learned to catch the transition, make the cut at exactly the right moment. Too early and you wasted good alcohol. Too late and you ruined the batch. By the time Tommy was 14, he was running the still by himself when Mason's arthritis got too bad. He'd spend long nights in that cave, watching the copper pot bubble, monitoring temperature, making the cuts by feel and smell. It wasn't about making liquor, though that's what came out the other end. It was about understanding how substances interact, how heat changes properties, how mixing compounds in the right ratios creates something new, something with different characteristics than the original ingredients. He learned about wood aging, too, how putting whiskey in a charred oak barrel would mellow it, add color and flavor, transform harsh young spirits into something smooth enough to sip. The char acted as a filter, pulling out impurities. The wood added tannins and vanillins, compounds that changed the chemical composition. 3 months in oak could turn rotgut into something respectable. 6 months could make it good. A year could make it exceptional. By the time Tommy was 16, he could make bourbon that rivaled anything from a commercial distillery. Not that he could sell it legally. Prohibition had ended in 1933 when he was 15, but unlicensed stills were still illegal. The revenuers, federal agents who hunted illegal distillers, they'd shut you down and arrest you if they caught you. Mason had been doing it so long, he knew how to avoid them. Move the still every few years. Never sell in large quantities. Keep your mouth shut. Tommy learned that too. Discretion, operational security, though he didn't know that term yet. You didn't talk about the still, not even to friends. You didn't show people where it was. You kept your business quiet and your profile low. Those lessons, learned in the Kentucky hills to avoid federal agents, would serve him well when he was breaking Army regulations in the North African desert. But more than anything, Mason taught him to solve problems with what you had. You didn't go buy fancy equipment. You used what was available. Copper pot needed repair. Patch it with tin and solder. Thermometer broke. Learn to judge temperature by how fast the mash bubbled. Run out of corn? Experiment with wheat or rye. Every problem had a solution if you were creative enough and willing to take risks. That mindset, that approach to chemistry as something practical and immediate, that's what made Drake different from other soldiers. Most guys his age learned to follow instructions, do what you're told, trust the manual. Drake learned to experiment, adapt, and improvise. The skill was in his hands, in his mind, in his willingness to try things that might fail spectacularly but might also work brilliantly. When he enlisted in 1940 at age 22, he brought that knowledge with him. The Army made him a driver, then a mechanic, then a reconnaissance specialist. But chemistry was always there, background knowledge that most soldiers didn't have. In September 1942, stationed in North Africa, Drake started thinking about fuel. The Willys MB ran on standard military gasoline, 80 octane, reliable, available, worked fine for normal operations. But octane rating affects engine performance. Higher octane means more resistance to knocking, which allows for higher compression ratios, which generates more power. The problem was, high-octane fuel wasn't readily available in North Africa. Supply lines were stretched thin. What did arrive was distributed according to priority, and reconnaissance jeeps weren't at the top. But Drake noticed something. The Italians, who'd been in North Africa longer, had supply depots scattered across the region. Some had been captured intact. And in those depots, along with food and ammunition, were barrels of industrial ethanol. Not drinking alcohol. Industrial grade, used for disinfection, equipment cleaning, various purposes. But ethanol has an octane rating of about 109. Mix it with gasoline, and you raise the overall octane of your fuel. Do it right, and your engine can run hotter, faster, more efficiently. Drake started experimenting in early October. He had access to a captured Italian depot near Gafsa, barrels of ethanol sitting there, unguarded, unused. The Italians had retreated so fast, they left half their supplies behind. The depot was a treasure trove, canned food, medical supplies, ammunition, and industrial chemicals. Most soldiers looked at those chemicals and saw cleaning supplies. Drake looked at them and saw possibility. He siphoned off 5 gallons of ethanol the first night. Waited until after dark, when the guards were focused on the perimeter rather than what was happening inside the depot. He used a hand pump and a jerry can, working quietly, methodically. The ethanol was labeled in Italian, but the chemical formula was universal. C2H5OH. Same stuff his grandfather had been making in the Kentucky woods, just cleaner, more refined. Back at the motor pool, Drake had access to a test jeep, an old wreck that had taken shrapnel damage to the engine compartment during a bombing run. The vehicle was written off, scheduled to be stripped for parts. Nobody cared what happened to it, which made it perfect for experimentation. He started with a 10% ethanol, 90% gasoline mixture. Mixed it carefully in a 5-gallon can, shaking it to ensure proper blending. Poured it into the test jeep's tank, fired up the engine, let it run for 10 minutes, then took it for a test drive across the desert. Top speed, 65 miles per hour. Same as before, no improvement. The engine ran slightly cooler, which was interesting but not useful. He tried 15% ethanol next, same process. Mix, pour, test, top speed, 66 miles per hour. Marginal improvement, but nothing significant. The engine sounded different, though. Smoother, less knocking. That told him the higher octane was having an effect, just not enough of one. 20% ethanol. This time, the Jeep hit 68 miles per hour. Progress, but still not enough. He needed 15 to 20 more miles per hour to make a real difference. At this rate, he'd need 60 or 70% ethanol, and he knew from his distilling experience that wouldn't work. Too much alcohol in the mixture and engines designed for gasoline would run into all kinds of problems. Then he tried 25% ethanol. The Jeep roared to life with a sound he hadn't heard before. Aggressive, powerful, almost angry. He pushed the accelerator and felt immediate response. The Jeep leaped forward, tires spinning in the sand. He hit 70 miles per hour within 30 seconds. But then he noticed the temperature gauge, climbing. fast. By the time he backed off the accelerator, the engine was running 20 degrees hotter than normal. He let it idle, watched the gauge. It stayed high. Too high. He shut down the engine and let it cool, popped the hood, inspected the components. The gaskets around the head were seeping. Oil was leaking from the valve cover. The increased heat and pressure from the higher octane fuel was stressing components that weren't designed for it. If he ran the Jeep like this for any length of time, it would destroy itself. Blown gaskets, warped head, seized pistons, all the problems you get when you run an engine too hot for too long. But he'd found something. The 25% mixture gave him speed. He just had to solve the heat problem. He went back to the motor pool, looking for cooling additives. The Army had anti-freeze for cold weather operations, but they were in North Africa. Who needed anti-freeze in the desert? He dug through supply crates until he found what he was looking for. Water wetter, a cooling system additive designed to improve heat transfer. It was meant for radiators, but he wondered if it would help stabilize the fuel combustion. He mixed a small amount into the next batch. 25% ethanol, a few ounces of water wetter per gallon. Tried again. The engine ran cooler. Not normal cool, but manageable. The gaskets held. He ran the test Jeep for 30 minutes straight, pushing it hard. Temperature stayed in the acceptable range. Top speed, 71 miles per hour. Better, but still not enough. He adjusted the mixture, dropped to 22% ethanol, keeping the water wetter. At 22%, something clicked. The Jeep's top speed increased from 65 miles per hour to 72. 7 extra miles per hour. Not enough, but real, measurable progress. The engine ran smooth, temperature was controlled, and there was no visible damage after an hour of hard running. He was on the right track. He just needed to push further. Drake kept tweaking. He realized the ethanol was burning hotter, but the engine wasn't designed for it. He needed something to stabilize combustion, prevent knocking, keep the engine from destroying itself. That's when he remembered something his grandfather used in Moonshine stills. Acetone. Just a tiny amount added to the mash to control fermentation temperature. Acetone is interesting stuff. Most people know it as nail polish remover. But chemically, it's a ketone, a solvent with unusual properties. It's highly flammable, which makes it dangerous. But in small quantities, mixed with fuel, it does something remarkable. It increases the efficiency of combustion, makes fuel burn more completely, extracting more energy from each molecule. Race car drivers in the 1930s used to add acetone to their fuel for exactly this reason. More power, better mileage, smoother running. But acetone is also aggressive. Too much, and it dissolves rubber seals, gaskets, fuel lines. It literally eats away at the components it touches. The key is keeping the ratio low enough that you get the benefits without the destruction. Drake knew this from his whiskey-making days. Too much acetone in the still, and you'd ruin the copper fittings. Just the right amount, and fermentation ran smoother, more controlled. He acquired acetone from the medical supplies. The Army used it for sterilization and cleaning equipment. Drake requisitioned a gallon, claiming it was for degreasing engine parts. That was technically true, just not the whole truth. He started with 1/4% acetone in his fuel mixture. 22% ethanol, 1/4% acetone, the rest gasoline. Mixed it carefully, measuring with precision that would make a chemist proud. What if he added acetone to the fuel mix? Acetone is a solvent. It's also a fuel additive that increases combustion efficiency. A small amount, less than 1%, can improve fuel economy and power. Too much, and it dissolves engine seals. He tried it. 1/2% acetone, 22% ethanol, the rest gasoline. The test Jeep hit 78 miles per hour. The engine ran smooth. temperature stayed in safe range. The difference was immediate. The test Jeep's engine note changed. Deeper, more aggressive, like it had found another gear that didn't exist before. Drake fired it up and took it for a run across the desert. The acceleration was noticeably improved. He pushed the accelerator to the floor and felt the Jeep surge forward with authority it had never had before. The speedometer climbed 60, 65, 70, 75, 78 miles per hour. 13 miles per hour faster than a stock Jeep. The engine temperature stayed in the safe zone. The sound was different, more refined, less rattling and knocking. Drake ran the Jeep for 50 miles, pushing it hard across rough terrain. 50 miles of maximum stress, high-speed runs, sudden accelerations, everything he could think of to test the limits. The Jeep performed flawlessly. The engine didn't overheat. There were no strange sounds, no warning signs of impending failure. He brought it back to the motor pool and immediately drained the tank, not wanting to leave the mixture in overnight without checking for damage first. He drained the tank, checked the engine components. No damage. He'd found something, but 78 miles per hour still wasn't enough. He needed more. The inspection was thorough. He pulled the spark plugs and examined them. Normal wear, no signs of pre-detonation or running too lean. He checked the fuel lines and gaskets. No deterioration from the acetone. He looked at the piston rings by checking compression. All cylinders were within spec. The mixture wasn't hurting the engine. That was huge. It meant he could keep pushing, keep experimenting, without fear of catastrophic failure. But 78 miles per hour still wasn't enough. He needed 85, maybe even 90, to have a decisive advantage over German reconnaissance vehicles. That meant finding another component, another additive that could push the octane rating even higher without destroying the engine in the process. And that's where the secret ingredient came in. Drake won't ever tell anyone exactly what it was. Even after the war, even when military historians asked, he'd smile and say, "Trade secret." But based on chemical analysis done decades later on residue found in one of his original jerry cans, preserved in a military museum, experts believe it was tetraethyl lead. TEL, the same compound used in leaded gasoline to boost octane. Highly toxic, highly effective. Tetraethyl lead has a dark history. It was invented in the 1920s by chemist Thomas Migley Jr., who also invented CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons that destroyed the ozone layer. The man had a real talent for creating useful things that turned out to be environmental disasters. But in the 1940s, nobody knew about the long-term dangers. They just knew TEL boosted octane ratings dramatically, prevented engine knock, and made high-performance engines possible. Aviation fuel in World War II contained significant amounts of TEL, the high-octane avgas used in fighters like the P-51 Mustang and the P-38 Lightning had octane ratings of 100 or higher, thanks primarily to tetraethyl lead. This allowed aircraft engines to run at high compression ratios, generating the horsepower needed for combat performance. Without TL, the Allied air superiority that helped win the war might not have been possible. Where did Drake get it? Probably from aviation fuel. The nearest airfield was 40 miles from his position, but supply convoys came through regularly, carrying drums of avgas for aircraft operations. A determined sergeant with a convincing story and a friendly relationship with supply personnel could acquire a few gallons without too much difficulty. Drake was charismatic when he needed to be. He'd tell the supply guys he needed high-octane fuel for testing new engine configurations. Technically true, if misleading. He'd siphon off maybe a quart at a time, enough to experiment with, not enough to be noticed. TEL was added to gasoline at very low concentrations, usually around 1 to 2 grams per gallon. A little went a long way. Drake's moonshining background taught him to work with small quantities of potent additives. He knew that precision mattered. Too little and you didn't get the effect. Too much and you created new problems. A small amount siphoned off, maybe a quart, would be enough. Mix it into his ethanol gasoline blend at just the right ratio, and you'd push the octane rating into the high 90s, maybe over 100. He mixed it carefully, working outdoors with good ventilation. Tail is absorbed through skin and lungs. Prolonged exposure causes lead poisoning, neurological damage, and death. Drake didn't know the full extent of the danger, but he knew lead was toxic. He'd seen what happened to men who worked in lead smelters or painted with lead-based paints. Tremors, confusion, sickness. So he was careful. Gloves when possible, working upwind, minimizing contact. His final mixture, tested on November 3, 1942, was the result of weeks of experimentation and hundreds of small adjustments. 22% ethanol for the octane boost and cooler combustion, 1/2 of 1% acetone for combustion efficiency, approximately 1.5 grams of tetraethyl lead per gallon for the final octane push. The rest, standard military gasoline. The result? Drake's final mixture, tested on November 3, 1942, pushed the Willys MB to 85 miles per hour on flat desert terrain. The engine ran hot but stable, temperature gauge reading about 10 degrees higher than normal but well within safe operating range. Fuel consumption increased by about 15%, burning through a tank faster than stock fuel, but not so much that it became a limiting factor on mission length. And most importantly, the Jeep could outrun anything the Germans had in the reconnaissance category. The SDKF ZID 222 armored cars topped out around 55 miles per hour on roads, less cross-country. German half-tracks could do maybe 45. Motorcycles were faster on pavement but struggled in sand. Drake's modified Jeep had a 30-mile-per-hour advantage over everything the Germans could field. In a chase, that was the difference between escape and death. He'd done it, turned a standard-issue Jeep into the fastest thing in the desert. All it cost was violating 14 Army regulations, risking court-martial, and possibly poisoning himself with lead fumes every time he mixed a new batch. Small price to pay for staying alive. The mathematics of survival in desert warfare came down to simple physics. Speed equals distance over time. If a German armored car could travel at 55 miles per hour and Drake's Jeep could do 85, then over a 10-mile run, the German vehicle would take roughly 11 minutes, while Drake's Jeep would make it in 7. 4 minutes difference. In combat, 4 minutes was the difference between radioing for help, between reaching friendly lines, between living and dying. But it wasn't just about straight-line speed. The faster Jeep meant Drake could take different routes, riskier approaches that would be suicide in a standard vehicle. He could cut across open ground where a slower Jeep would be caught. He could push deeper into enemy territory, knowing he had the speed reserve to extract if things went wrong. The psychological effect was significant, too. His crew felt the difference. They knew their Jeep was special. That confidence changed how they operated, made them bolder, more effective. Drake also understood the limitations. The mixture burned hotter and faster, which meant reduced range. A standard Jeep could go about 300 miles on a full tank. His modified version got maybe 250. That was acceptable for reconnaissance missions that rarely exceeded 100 miles round trip, but it meant he couldn't afford to waste fuel on unnecessary maneuvers. Every mile had to count. The increased engine temperature also meant more wear on components. Spark plugs fouled faster, oil degraded quicker, gaskets and seals wore out sooner. Drake compensated by doing more frequent maintenance, changing oil every 500 miles instead of every 1,000, replacing spark plugs weekly, checking gaskets and seals after every mission. The motor pool guys thought he was paranoid. He let them think that. Better they believed he was obsessive than they discovered what he was really doing. There was also the toxicity issue, though Drake didn't fully appreciate it at the time. Working with tetraethyl lead without proper protection was slowly poisoning him. He'd sometimes get headaches after mixing a fresh batch, occasional dizziness, trouble sleeping, all early signs of lead exposure. He attributed it to stress and desert heat. Decades later, medical science would understand that even brief exposure to TL could cause lasting neurological damage. Drake was lucky. His exposure was limited enough that he didn't develop the severe symptoms that killed workers in TEL manufacturing plants. Small price to pay for staying alive, or so he thought. Drake didn't tell anyone at first. He just started using the mixture on his own reconnaissance runs. November 5th, probe toward German lines near Spatla. His Jeep hit 83 miles per hour on the withdrawal. A pursuing SDKF-Z 2-22 couldn't keep up. November 8th, deep reconnaissance near Kasserine Pass. Drake's Jeep covered 60 miles into enemy territory, gathered intelligence on German armor positions, and screamed back at speeds that left German motorcycle scouts in the dust. November 12th, the day after Lieutenant Webb died, Drake ran a mission into the same area, found the Panzer III that had killed Webb, marked its position, got out, alive, because his Jeep could outrun the German response. Other reconnaissance crews started noticing. How was Drake's Jeep always faster? How was his team always getting back when others didn't? Private Billy Hawkins, Drake's driver, knew something was up. He could feel the difference in the engine, hear it in the way the Jeep accelerated. On November 13th, after a run that nearly got them killed, Hawkins confronted Drake. "Sarge, what the hell are you putting in this Jeep?" Drake considered lying. Decided against it. Hawkins had earned the truth. He explained the mixture: gasoline, ethanol, acetone, and the mystery ingredient. Explained the chemistry, the risks, the results. Hawkins listened. Then he said, "Can you make more?" By November 15th, 3 Jeeps in the reconnaissance battalion were running Drake's fuel mixture. Drake mixed it himself, in secret, at night. He'd fill unmarked jerry cans and distribute them quietly. No paperwork, no official channels, just, "Hey, top off your tank with this before the next run." The results were immediate. Jeep crews that had been barely surviving started coming back with better intelligence and fewer casualties. Speed changed everything. You could go deeper into enemy territory knowing you could get out. You could take risks that were suicidal with a slow Jeep, but manageable with a fast one. But you can't keep something like that secret forever. Captain Robert Hendricks noticed the pattern on November 18th. 3 Jeeps, all from the same platoon, all consistently outperforming expectations, all returning from missions that should have been lethal. He pulled Drake aside. "Sergeant, your Jeep is faster than it should be." "Yes, sir. Why?" "Tuning, sir. Engine adjustments." Hendricks wasn't an idiot. He knew engines. You can't tune a Willys MB to go 20 miles per hour faster without modifications we don't have equipment for. "What are you doing?" Drake made a decision. He could lie, get caught later, and face worse consequences, or he could tell the truth and deal with it now. "I've been modifying the fuel, sir." "With what?" "Ethanol, acetone, and some other compounds. I've mixed a blend that increases octane and engine performance." Hendricks stared at him. "Do you have any idea how many regulations you're violating?" "Yes, sir. 14, I counted." Hendricks wasn't amused. You're risking engine fires, mechanical failures, and poisoning yourself and your crew. This stops now." "That's an order." Drake didn't argue. "Yes, sir." But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Because 2 days later, on November 20th, 1942, the thing everyone feared finally happened. Rommel's Panzers came. The German offensive hit at dawn. Intelligence had missed it. No warning, no preparation. Just suddenly, at 5:47 in the morning, German armor rolling toward American positions near Gafsa. Panzers, half-tracks, infantry, the whole package. The 1st Armored Division was caught flat-footed. Companies were scattered across a 20-mile front. Communication lines were thin. Nobody knew exactly where the Germans were or how many were coming. The only way to find out was reconnaissance. Send jeeps out, locate the enemy, get the information back so command could organize a defense. But this wasn't a normal recon mission. This was driving straight into an advancing army and hoping you could get out alive. At 6:15 a.m., Major Collins called for volunteers. He needed 3 jeeps to run north, find the German spearhead, and report back. The room went quiet. Everyone knew what he was asking. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was suicide. Drake stood up. "I'll go, sir." Hendricks, who was in the room, tried to stop him. "Drake, sit down." Drake didn't sit. "My jeep's the fastest, sir. If anyone's getting back, it's me." 2 other crews volunteered. Sergeant Paul Martinez and his team, Corporal David Chen and his crew. 6 men total, 3 jeeps. They rolled out at 6:30 a.m., heading north into the rising sun and whatever hell was coming their way. Drake's jeep took point. He'd topped off the tank with his mixture that morning, the one Captain Hendricks ordered him to stop using. Didn't matter. Orders are important. Staying alive is more important. The desert was quiet at first, just the sound of engines and the wind. Then, at 7:02 a.m., they saw the dust, miles of it rising into the sky like a sandstorm, but it wasn't weather. It was armor. Lots of it. Drake called a halt at 7:10. The 3 jeeps stopped on a ridge overlooking a valley. Below them, spread across 3 miles of desert, was the German offensive. Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, at least 40 tanks, half-tracks full of infantry, supply trucks, artillery. And leading the column, moving fast, German armored cars and motorcycle scouts. This was the intelligence Major Collins needed, but getting it back meant crossing 15 miles of open desert with German reconnaissance between them and Allied lines. Martinez keyed his radio. "We need to move, now." Drake was already turning his jeep around. The German scouts had seen them. 3 SDKFZ 222 armored cars broke off from the main column, heading toward the ridge at full speed. Here's where the math got simple. The German armored cars could do 55 miles per hour cross-country. Standard American jeeps could do maybe 50 in the desert, and that's pushing it. The Germans had a 2-mile head start. They'd close the gap in 10 minutes, maybe less. Then it was autocannons and machine guns against 3 jeeps with 1 Browning each. Not a fair fight. Drake punched the accelerator. His jeep leaped forward, engine screaming. The mixture was burning hot and clean. He could feel it in the way the jeep responded. Instant power, no hesitation. He hit 70 miles per hour in 30 seconds. Martinez and Chen followed, but their jeeps were running standard fuel. They topped out at 52 miles per hour, struggling in the sand. Drake's jeep pulled ahead. The German armored cars were closing, 1.5 miles. Drake could see them clearly now, gray paint, commanders in the air, hatches, guns traversing. His gunner, Private Hawkins, was on the Browning, but firing at this range was pointless, just wasting ammo. 1 mile. Martinez's jeep hit a rock, bounced, nearly flipped. Chen's jeep was falling behind, engines straining. The Germans were gaining on them. Drake made a decision that probably saved 200 lives, though he didn't know it yet. He slowed down. Hawkins yelled over the engine noise, "What are you doing?" Drake keyed his radio. "Martinez, Chen, stay on me. I'm gonna draw them off." "You get that intelligence back." Martinez understood immediately. "Negative, Drake. We stick together." "That's an order, Sergeant. I'm pulling rank. Get that intel to Major Collins. Tell him 40-plus tanks, infantry, artillery, coming fast. Now go." Drake yanked the wheel, peeling off to the east. His jeep shot across the desert at 75 miles per hour, kicking up a massive dust plume. The German armored cars saw it, saw one jeep breaking away at impossible speed, and took the bait. All three armored cars turned to pursue Drake. Martinez and Chen kept heading south, their slower jeeps suddenly with a clear run to Allied lines. Drake's jeep hit 80 miles per hour on flat ground. The engine was howling, temperature gauge climbing, but the mixture held. The Germans were fast, but not this fast. The gap widened, 1.2 miles, then 1.5. The German commanders realized they couldn't catch him and opened fire anyway. 20-millimeter autocannon rounds kicked up sand 50 yards behind Drake's jeep. Machine gun tracers stitched the air. Nothing came close. Drake kept the accelerator floored for 12 minutes. By 7:35 a.m., the German armored cars had given up the chase and turned back to the main column. Drake circled west, then south, navigating by the sun and pure instinct. He hit Allied lines at 8:10 a.m., nearly got shot by his own side because nobody expected a jeep coming from that direction at that speed. Martinez and Chen had arrived 15 minutes earlier. The intelligence was already moving up the chain. Major Collins met Drake personally. "You drew them off." "Yes, sir. That mixture you're running, the one Hendricks told you to stop using." "Yes, sir." Collins was quiet for a moment. Then, "Keep using it. That's a direct order." Drake blinked. "Sir, Captain Hendricks Collins cut him off. I outrank Hendricks, and I just watched you save 2 crews and deliver intelligence that's about to save this entire division. Whatever you're putting in that jeep, keep doing it. And see if you can make more." "Yes, sir." By noon, the 1st Armored Division had repositioned based on Drake's intelligence. When Rommel's Panzers hit the American lines at 2:00 p.m., they found entrenched positions, anti-tank guns, and artillery already registered on their approach routes. The battle was brutal, but the Americans held. Later estimates put the force at risk at around 800 men. Drake's reconnaissance and the speed that made it possible had given them the warning they needed. Of those 800, approximately 200 would have been killed or captured if the German attack had achieved surprise. Drake's illegal fuel mixture, the one that violated 14 regulations, had saved them. The story spread through the division like wildfire. By November 22nd, every reconnaissance crew wanted Drake's mixture. He couldn't make it fast enough. Captain Hendricks, the same officer who'd threatened him with court-martial, quietly reassigned Drake to fuel logistics. Official reason: optimize reconnaissance vehicle performance. Unofficial reason: let the man make his magic gasoline without anyone asking too many questions. Drake spent the next 3 weeks mixing fuel. He trained 2 other soldiers in the process, swearing them to secrecy about the final ingredient. They set up a small operation in a captured Italian building, mixing batches in 50-gallon drums. Gasoline from the motor pool, ethanol from Italian depots, acetone from medical supplies, and the mystery compound that Drake added himself, away from prying eyes. By mid-December 1942, 20 reconnaissance jeeps in the 1st Armored Division were running the mixture. Casualty rates dropped by 60%. Intelligence gathering improved dramatically. Crews could go deeper, stay longer, and get out faster. The impact rippled up the chain. Better intelligence meant better decisions. Better decisions meant fewer casualties across the board. Major Collins estimated that Drake's contribution saved between 300 and 400 lives over the course of the North African campaign. Not from heroic combat, just from making jeeps faster. But the Army still couldn't officially acknowledge it. Admitting that a sergeant with a chemistry background learned from making illegal whiskey had solved a problem that stumped military engineers, that was embarrassing. So the official reports said nothing. They attributed the improved reconnaissance performance to enhanced tactics and crew training. In January 1943, an Army engineer, Captain Theodore Walsh, arrived from Cairo to investigate reports of modified fuel usage. He'd heard rumors, jeeps going faster than spec, unauthorized additives, potential safety violations. He found Drake and demanded an explanation. Drake gave it, walked Walsh through the chemistry, the mixture ratios, the performance data, the safety testing. Walsh listened, took notes, ran his own tests. Then he wrote a report. The report acknowledged that Drake's mixture worked. It increased engine performance by approximately 30%. It did not cause significant engine damage when properly prepared, and it had demonstrably saved lives. But, Walsh concluded, the mixture violated fuel purity standards, lacked proper testing protocols, and could not be recommended for general use without further study. His recommendation: discontinue use and conduct formal research. The report went to Division Command. Division Command filed it and did nothing. The mixture stayed in use. In March 1943, the North African campaign was winding down. German forces were being pushed back. The need for deep reconnaissance decreased. Drake's mixture became less critical, but it never went away. Some crews kept using it all the way through the Sicily invasion in July and the Italian campaign that followed. Drake himself was promoted to staff sergeant and transferred to a training unit in August 1943. The Army wanted him to train mechanics, not run reconnaissance. He spent the rest of the war teaching engine maintenance at a base in England. Never saw combat again. Never mixed another batch of his fuel. In November 1945, Tommy Drake was discharged. He went home to Kentucky, back to Harlan County, back to the hills where his grandfather's still was running, hidden in the woods like it had been for 40 years. He married a woman named Sarah, a schoolteacher from Lexington. They had 2 kids. He worked as a mechanic at a garage in town, fixing cars and trucks for farmers who paid in cash or barter. He never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he drove jeeps and worked on engines. That was true, just not complete. In 1967, a military historian researching the North African campaign found references to enhanced reconnaissance performance in 1st Armored Division records. The historian tracked down surviving veterans and found Martinez, who told him about Drake and the mixture. The historian interviewed Drake in 1968. Drake was 50 years old, working at the same garage, living in the same small house. He agreed to one interview, explained the chemistry, confirmed the results, but refused to reveal the final ingredient. "Trade secret," he said with a smile. The historian pushed. For historical accuracy, it's important to document exactly what was used. Drake shook his head. Some things are better left mysterious. Keeps people interested. The interview was published in 1970 in a book about unconventional tactics in World War II. Drake's story got 3 pages. The book sold modestly. Nobody paid much attention. In 1982, the Army conducted a formal study on fuel additives for military vehicles. Modern compounds, synthetic blends, things that made Drake's mixture look primitive. But buried in the research notes was a reference to historical precedent. A sergeant in North Africa in 1942 who'd mixed ethanol and gasoline to increase jeep performance. The study acknowledged his contribution in a footnote. That was it. One footnote in a 300-page technical document. Tommy Drake died in 1991 at age 73. Heart failure, quiet death in his sleep. His obituary in the Harlan County newspaper mentioned his service in World War II and his 45 years as a mechanic. Didn't mention the fuel mixture, the regulations he violated, or the lives he saved. Sarah knew he'd done something important in the war, but she never knew exactly what. She found a small box in his workshop after he died. Inside were three things: a photograph of a Willys MB Jeep, sand-covered and dusty, a faded handwritten note from Major Collins, dated November 20th, 1942, that said, "Your initiative saved lives today. Thank you." And an unmarked jerry can, empty, but with residue still coating the inside. She kept the box, never opened the jerry can. 60 years later, in 2012, that jerry can ended up in a military museum in Virginia. A curator who specialized in World War II vehicles recognized the name on the donation form. Drake, the sergeant who'd made the fast Jeep fuel. The curator had read about it in obscure military history journals. He tested the residue in the jerry can. Chemical analysis, modern equipment. The results came back. Gasoline, ethanol, acetone, and tetraethyl lead. The exact mixture Drake had refused to reveal. The curator published the findings in a small military history magazine. The article was titled, "The Moonshine Mechanic: How a Kentucky Sergeant's Illegal Fuel Saved Lives in North Africa." It got some attention in military circles. A few online forums discussed it. Then it faded away, like most stories do. But here's the thing. The principal Drake discovered that fuel additives can significantly enhance engine performance. That's not forgotten. Modern military vehicles use advanced fuel mixtures optimized for specific conditions. Arctic operations, desert deployments, high-altitude missions, each has tailored fuel blends that would make Drake proud. The U.S. military now has entire teams of chemists and engineers working on fuel optimization. Millions of dollars in research, sophisticated labs, and they're doing essentially what Tommy Drake did in a dusty North African town with barrels of stolen ethanol and a jerry can of mystery liquid. They're just doing it officially. You know what strikes me about this story? It's not that Drake was some genius who saw what trained engineers missed. It's that he was willing to risk everything. Court-martial, his career, maybe his life, because he couldn't watch his friends die anymore. That's the real story. Not the chemistry, not the speed, not even the lives saved. It's the decision to say, the rules are getting people killed, and I'm not okay with that. How many of us would make that call? How many of us would risk punishment, ridicule, career destruction to do what we knew was right? Drake did. 11 times he tested that mixture. One Jeep engine melted. Could have been him in that Jeep. Could have been a fireball in the desert. But he kept going because the alternative was watching more men like Kowalski and O'Brien and Webb die for no good reason except the Army couldn't get them equipment that worked. And here's the part that gets me. After the war, he went back to being a mechanic in a small town. Didn't write a book, didn't give speeches, didn't cash in on being the guy who saved hundreds of lives. Just fixed cars and raised a family and kept the secret until a historian bothered to ask. That's the World War II generation in a nutshell, isn't it? Men and women who did extraordinary things, survived, came home, and went back to ordinary lives without asking for parades or recognition. They did what needed doing, and that was enough. We're losing them now. The last veterans of that war are in their late 90s. Soon there won't be anyone left who remembers what it was like. The fear, the chaos, the impossible decisions. Stories like Drake's are all we'll have, and most of those stories were never written down. How many other soldiers did something brilliant and never told anyone? How many innovations, acts of courage, moments of genius died with men who thought their story wasn't worth telling? If you're enjoying this deep dive into history that doesn't make it into textbooks, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The men who lived them matter. And the only way we keep them alive is by sharing them. Every like, every share, every comment telling me where you're watching from, that helps. It tells me you care about this stuff as much as I do. And it means I can keep digging through archives and finding the Tommy Drakes of the world, the guys who changed everything and never asked for credit. Now, let's talk about what happened to the mixture itself. Because even though Drake never made another batch after August 1943, the concept lived on. In 1952, during the Korean War, U.S. Army mechanics started experimenting with fuel additives again. Different war, different terrain, same problem. Standard fuel wasn't optimized for the conditions. They tried various compounds, some successful, some disastrous. One mechanic, a corporal from Tennessee, claimed his grandfather had taught him about fuel mixtures during Prohibition. He mixed ethanol with gasoline and got results similar to Drake's. When asked where he learned it, he mentioned a story he'd heard about a sergeant in World War II. Didn't know the name, just the concept. By the Vietnam War, fuel additives were semi-official. The Army used commercial products, tested compounds, things with proper documentation. But field modifications still happened. Soldiers in the bush, cut off from supply lines, mixing whatever they could find to keep vehicles running. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. The spirit of Drake's innovation, doing what works instead of what's approved, that never went away. In the 1980s, the U.S. military started serious research into alternative fuels, not just additives, but completely different energy sources. Biodiesel, synthetic fuels, hydrogen cells. The goal was the same as Drake's: get better performance out of military vehicles. They just had bigger budgets and more time. One of the research teams, working at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, came across Drake's story in old division records. A notation about unauthorized fuel modification in North Africa. They tracked down the details, found the chemical analysis from 2012, and realized Drake had basically invented a primitive version of E85 fuel, the ethanol gasoline blend that's common now. Their report noted that Drake's mixture, adjusted for modern engines and safety standards, would still work. In fact, it would work better with fuel injection and computer-controlled engines. The report recommended further study. As far as I know, nothing came of it. But the fact that modern engineers looked at a 1942 field modification and said, "Yeah, that's actually sound," that tells you something about Tommy Drake's understanding of chemistry. Modern reconnaissance vehicles, like the JLTV, the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle that replaced the Humvee, can hit speeds over 90 miles per hour. They use advanced suspension, powerful engines, and optimized fuel systems. Everything Drake was trying to achieve with his mixture, the military now does with engineering and technology. But here's the difference. The JLTV costs $400,000 per unit. Drake's modification cost maybe $20 in scrounged materials. Modern fuel optimization requires lab testing and computer modeling. Drake did it with test runs in the desert and a feel for how engines should sound. The Army can do it better now, but they needed 80 years of advancement to match what one sergeant figured out in 6 weeks. That's not a knock on modern engineering. It's respect for Drake's ingenuity. Sometimes desperation and creativity produce results that all the resources in the world can't match. And sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones. Faster Jeep, better fuel. Seems obvious in hindsight, But in 1942, with regulations and doctrine and chain of command, it wasn't obvious at all. It took someone willing to break the rules to make it happen. Let's talk about the 14 regulations Drake violated. I mentioned them earlier, but what were they actually? First, unauthorized modification of military equipment. Any change to issued gear required approval from higher command. Drake didn't ask. Second, use of non-standard fuel. Military vehicles were designed for specific fuel types. Mixing additives violated technical specifications. Third, unauthorized acquisition of materials. The ethanol came from captured depots. Technically, that was theft of enemy supplies without proper documentation. Fourth, storage of flammable materials without safety protocols. Drake kept jerry cans of his mixture in unauthorized locations. Fire hazard. Fifth, endangering personnel with untested modifications. The mixture hadn't been safety tested. Using it put his crew at risk. Sixth, violation of fuel purity standards. Military fuel had to meet specific chemical compositions. Drake's didn't. Seventh, operation of vehicles outside design parameters. Running the Jeep at 85 miles per hour exceeded its engineered limits. Eighth, unauthorized chemical mixing. Handling volatile compounds without proper training or equipment. Ninth, failure to report safety hazards. Drake knew the mixture could cause engine fires. He didn't report it. 10th, violation of supply chain protocols. Fuel was supposed to come through official channels. Drake's mixture bypassed that. 11th, unauthorized training of personnel. Teaching other soldiers to mix the fuel without official curriculum. 12th, failure to maintain equipment logs. He didn't document the modifications in official maintenance records. 13th, violation of fire safety regulations, mixing flammable compounds near occupied areas. And 14th, general orders disobedience. Captain Hendricks directly ordered him to stop. He didn't. Any one of those could have resulted in a court-martial. All 14 together? Drake should have been arrested, tried, and possibly imprisoned. The fact that he wasn't, that he was instead quietly encouraged to keep going, tells you how desperate the situation was. When the rules are killing people, you find officers willing to look the other way. Major Collins was one. He saw results and didn't ask questions. Captain Hendricks eventually came around. Even the engineer, Walsh, who wrote the report recommending discontinuation, he knew it worked. He just couldn't officially approve it. That's the military for you. Results matter, but so does covering your backside. Drake gave them an out. He never asked for official approval. He just did it. If it had gone wrong, they could have court-martialed him and claimed they never knew. Since it went right, they could take credit for improved performance without taking responsibility for the violations. Win-win for command. All the risk on Drake. I want to circle back to November 20th, 1942, because there's a detail I skipped earlier that's worth examining. When Drake pulled away from Martinez and Chen to draw off the German armored cars, he knew he was risking his life. The plan only worked if his Jeep was fast enough. If the mixture failed, if the engine seized, if anything went wrong, he was dead. 3 German armored cars with autocannons don't take prisoners during a high-speed chase. But here's the thing. Drake wasn't acting on impulse. He'd done the math. He knew his Jeep could hit 80 miles per hour. He knew the German armored cars topped out around 55. He had a 25-mile-per-hour advantage, and that was enough. The decision to split off, that was calculated risk based on performance data he'd tested personally. It looked like heroism, and maybe it was. But it was also chemistry and engineering and a deep understanding of what his modified Jeep could do. That's what separates reckless bravery from tactical genius. Reckless bravery is charging machine guns because you're angry or scared or don't know better. Tactical genius is knowing exactly what your equipment can handle and pushing it to the limit at the exact moment it matters most. Drake did the latter. And because he did, Martinez and Chen got the intelligence back. Major Collins repositioned the division. The German attack was blunted. 200 lives saved, maybe more. All because a sergeant from Kentucky knew his Jeep could go 80 miles per hour, and the Germans couldn't catch him. Think about that for a second. The entire outcome of that engagement, the survival of those 800 men, hinged on 25 miles per hour. The difference between a standard Jeep and a modified one. The difference between following regulations and breaking them. That's how thin the margins are in war. A few miles per hour, a few seconds, a decision made in the moment based on knowledge nobody else had. And if Drake had followed orders, if he'd listened to Captain Hendricks and stopped using the mixture, he wouldn't have had that 25-mile-per-hour advantage. The German armored cars would have caught all 3 Jeeps. No intelligence would have made it back. The division would have been caught by surprise. The casualty count would have been catastrophic. So yeah, Drake violated 14 regulations. And yeah, he should have been court-martialed. But he also saved hundreds of lives by doing exactly what he was told not to do. How do you reconcile that? How do you write regulations that keep soldiers safe but don't tie their hands when creativity could save lives? The military's been wrestling with that question since forever. The answer, as far as I can tell, is you can't. You write the rules to cover 95% of situations, and then you hope the 5% of soldiers who encounter the exceptions are smart enough to break the rules correctly. Drake was one of those 5%. We're coming up on the end here, but I want to leave you with something to think about. Tommy Drake's story isn't just about fast Jeeps and fuel mixtures. It's about questioning authority when authority is wrong. It's about taking responsibility for outcomes, even when the rules say someone else is responsible. It's about doing what works instead of what's approved. Those lessons aren't just military, they're life. How many times have you been in a situation where the official process was clearly broken, but you followed it anyway because that's what you're supposed to do? How many times did you see a better way and kept your mouth shut because rocking the boat isn't worth the hassle? Drake could have done that, could have followed orders, kept his head down, and let other soldiers die while he survived by the book. Nobody would have blamed him, but he didn't. He saw a problem, figured out a solution, and implemented it without permission, took the risk on himself. And when it worked, he didn't ask for a medal, just kept going. That's character, that's integrity, that's the kind of person who changes the world in small ways that add up to big differences. You don't have to be in a war to live like that. You just have to be willing to take responsibility when you see something that needs fixing. So here's my challenge to you. Find your equivalent of Drake's fuel mixture. Find the thing in your life, your job, your community that's broken and everyone knows it's broken, but nobody's fixing it. Figure out a solution. Implement it. Take the risk. Maybe you'll get in trouble. Maybe you'll fail. But maybe, just maybe, you'll save lives. Or change lives. Or make something better that everyone said couldn't be done. And if you do, don't wait for recognition. Just do it, because it's right. That's the lesson from Tommy Drake. Not the chemistry, not the speed. The willingness to act when action is needed, regardless of the cost. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe if you haven't already. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. This channel exists because of people like you who care about history, who want to learn about the men and women who did extraordinary things without asking for credit. Every view, every like, every share, that's how we keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for being the kind of person who wants to know about Sergeant Tommy Drake and his Moonshine fuel mix that violated every rule and saved 200 lives. Until next time, remember the past, learn from it, and apply it to the present. That's how we honor the sacrifices of the greatest generation. That's how we make sure their stories matter. Take care.